Hi there. Thanks for riding along with me. Welcome to Traffic Time Episode 2, The Big Deuce. This episode is a continuation of the premiere Traffic Time vlog, where I spent a lot of time reacting to that famous YouTuber, Casey Neistat's reveal that he was being investigated by the FAA. If you have not seen it, you may want to watch OPG's Traffic Time vlog number 1. That really set up what I'm going to be talking about here. I'll throw a link to that one at the end of this video if you want to go back and watch it. But the last episode, I just tried to imagine what Casey Neistat's investigation meant for the rest of us small UAS pilots. This episode, I'm going to try to present some hopefully helpful information about where we're at. So before we get started, I'm not a lawyer, a lobbyist, a legal expert, any type of subject matter expert in this field. These are just my thoughts. This is my research, my reasoning, my rants, and Gronk. So these episode notes, I'll include a link to everything I'm about to discuss, and you can find that on the website. That's at www.oldponggeezer.com, and you can download a copy of kind of these talking points and some of the research that I've come across. So for Traffic Time episode number 2, we are going to take a look at just a few of the events over the last 5 years or so that has got all of us sUAS pilots into this hot mess. In the closing minutes of Traffic Time episode number 1, I kind of came down to this conclusion, and that's how do we avoid feeling like a criminal every time we lift off? So let's quickly look back at Casey's May 24th video. In that video, he was reviewing the newly released DJI Spark, and while he was talking, he just casually revealed that he was under investigation. He stated he couldn't fly in New York City, so in the video, he traveled to some other location. In this and previous videos, he uses his drone footage to augment his daily vlog and enhance his storytelling. And personally, I'm a big fan of his videos. I like his artistry, I like his editing, I like the way he tells a story, and he seems like a really genuine and decent guy. I am concerned a little bit with, a lot, with some of his drone operations that he has filmed and he's posted on YouTube. I think a lot of people express that same concern, and nobody really knows if he has his Part 107 certification or if he flies with any permissions or waivers. We just don't really know. I haven't seen every single minute of all of his videos, but what I really wonder about in this whole thing is what was that tipping point for what he's been doing over the last many years. What was it that caused the FAA to launch this investigation? And honestly, I wonder, after his reveal of the FAA, I wonder if any of us would, through accident, through ignorance, or even intention, quickly would we find ourselves in Casey's exact same predicament. Okay, so in order to kind of think this whole thing through, we need to start by looking at that 2012 FAA Modernization and Reform Act. In many ways, this act got us in this whole sUAS mess, and it wasn't supposed to be that way. This act provided a long-term direction and funding to the FAA. It was a $63 billion with a B, budget that covered the periods of 2012 through 2015. And part of it included like that next-gen ATC system, so it was geared really towards air traffic. But the act was also supposed to encourage the acceleration of unmanned aircraft into our U.S. airspace. And the act restricted the FAA's authority over model aircraft, and that's kind of a big deal we'll talk about later on. And really it's what happened and what failed to happen in these congressional mandates that's really directly impacted the current state of the drone laws in the United States. And here's a little hint. The FAA is significantly behind these mandates and the implementation of these small UAS guidelines. So we'll come back to this act in a few minutes, but keep that in mind because it is kind of important. Okay, so let's go, that was 2012. Let's kind of go to 2013. And there was this case, and it was the FAA versus Raphael, and I think the name is pronounced Pirker, Pirker. The FAA prosecuted Pirker for a video that he created back in 2011. Keep that in mind, that's before this whole Modernization Act. The FAA assessed him a $10,000 fine. An administrative law judge in this case ruled that this this aircraft was a model and the FAA had no jurisdiction. The FAA appealed to the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, who ruled that the drone was indeed an aircraft. And that part is significant because that's still the only decision regarding the standing of drones in the national airspace up to this day. Eventually, Perker and the FAA reached a settlement. They reduced that fine down to $1,000. I think it was $1,100 actually, and he did not have to admit any type of guilt. And let's remember that as we talk about Casey Neistat's example later. And so the next thing let's talk about is what came in 2016, and that's the FAA finally published the sUAS rules, the Parts 107 and Part 101, which was kind of the registration and the rules for flying. It enhanced and expanded the FAA Section 333, which is commercial waivers, and the Section 336, which were model aircraft. And once again, I'm not the total expert on all of this, so there's probably some points of law in here that people can disagree with, and if you have better knowledge, please put those in the comments, or better way to express it, because we do get into a lot of legalese here. But basically it came down to distinguishing commercial operations versus recreational and hobbyists for these small UAS. But there was also this kind of weird thing with the model aircraft, which will be part of the problem we'll see later on, where the FAA tried to insert themselves into this model aircraft group of folks. But basically, these rules established, there were clear rules for flying drones that were 0.55 pounds, about a half a pound, up to 55 pounds. In that category, here are the rules for flying in the national airspace. And that was good. It also established a waiver process where pilots would have a way to say, I need to fly at night, I need to fly in this restricted airspace, and there was a waiver process established on how to do that. There was a process for commercial certification. So if you were flying your drone for profit, here's a way you could do that without having to do a 333 exception or a 333 waiver. And basically when this thing came out, it kind of promised to all of the drone operators that life was just going to be wonderful. But not so fast, because it's turning out that's not really what's happening here. Okay, so let's move on to a company called Skypan. Skypan was is a New York City-based aerial photo company. And I'm pretty sure the way I understand this case, they operated without any type of 333 exemption, because this was all prior to Part 107. And they were doing some stuff, prior to 2016. But the FAA, because they did not have their commercial exceptions, the FAA fined them $1.9 million in October of 2016, right after this Part 107 happened. There again, the FAA versus Skypan, they went through a settlement agreement, and during that settlement, the fine was reduced to $200,000, but there was also a $150,000 fine if Skypan violated the agreement, which was they could no longer fly in the city of New York. And does that sound familiar when we talk about Casey? He's not able to fly in New York City anymore. So we'll get back to that as well. And while we're on the subject of New York City, let's talk a little bit about some things that are happening in New York City itself, because that's where Casey Neistat flies most of the time. So from 2015 to January 2017, from what I can tell, there's been at least 4 cases that the city has brought against drone operators for crashes that have resulted in some type of property damage or some type of injury. And these are the only 4 that seem to have led to some type of municipal prosecution. And these pilots or recreationalists, whatever, were charged with such things like criminal mischief, reckless endangerment, or disorderly conduct. That's how the city was able to apply the law against them outside of any type of FAA laws. And the punishments for these folks included fines, restitution, and community service, but not really jail time. So that's kind of what was going on in New York City. They're using the municipal laws that are already on the books to prosecute operators, but really in the event of some kind of serious accident. So let's move to Seattle for a second. January 2017, probably everybody saw it on the news. This guy flies his drone into the Space Needle. It was all over CNN and all over everything. It's hard for me to find any follow-up information to what happened. I know they ended up finding the pilot because the manufacturer of the drone provided the owner's information to the police or whoever the authorities were that were investigated. So, but I don't know what happened to the pilot. There's no real record of has he gone to court or anything that I can find. So maybe somebody out there knows more of that story that lives in the Seattle area. But from what I can tell, not knowing if this guy was flying recreationally, if this guy had a commercial license, I don't know. But there doesn't appear at this point or at that time when he was flying in January or December 31st, it was like New Year's Eve, somewhere in there. There's no real city ordinance in Seattle against flying drones in that area. It doesn't look like he's in any type of controlled airspace. If he's like a Part 107 pilot, he may be 5 miles from an airport. If he's recreational. So I'm not familiar with exactly what those restrictions would be for flying recreational, but just on the surface, it doesn't look like he totally violated a bunch of laws. But I haven't seen the entire video, so I'm not sure what they could charge him with. And if it was just a flyaway and the drone flew away from him, but he's within 400 foot of the needle, and if he's flying under 107 and he was 400 feet from the building and not more than 400 feet above it, I don't know. Maybe he didn't violate any laws. I don't know. But in Seattle at that same time, right after that, in February 2017, there's this different guy in Seattle named David Skinner. And this guy was sentenced to 30 days in jail for a action that he was involved with his drone. So this fine was really from an incident that happened in 2015 where he was flying his drone over a parade in the city, and he had some sort of flyaway or somehow he lost control of his drone. The drone crashed into a building and then fell down onto the crowd who was watching the parade, and it injured 2 people, and 1 woman, I think, was knocked unconscious. And I don't know if he didn't report it or if he ran off, but they were able to figure out who he was. And the city, not the FAA, were the ones that prosecuted this guy, Skinner, and charged him, again, like New York, with reckless endangerment. This guy could have served up to 1 year in jail and a $5,000 fine. He ended up with a 30-day in jail sentence and a $1,000 fine. And I think right now that case is under appeal. But depending on how you look at it, he may have been reckless. I don't know any of the information about it. Here's a guy flying his drone. The drone gets away from him. It hits a building, crashes down on some people, and this guy's in jail for 30 days. And I don't know anything. Was he flying? Obviously, he shouldn't have been flying anywhere near a parade. So it sounds like he was being reckless. I get that. But we don't know the details. Consider yourself if you're in a park and your drone gets away from you, smacks into a tree, careens off a tree, and falls onto people sitting at the park. Or whatever. It's easy to happen, and this is something. Are you criminally liable, or are you just liable for damages? It's a scary thought. So since we're on this whole kick of the law, let's talk about Kentucky. In Kentucky, there's a guy named, hopefully people have heard about this, there's a guy named David Boggs, and he had his drone shot out of the sky, apparently over private property by the property owner. His name was William Meredith, and you may also have heard of this guy. He calls himself the Drone Slayer. So originally when this happened, this was probably back in the middle of 2015, they originally arrested this William Meredith for discharging a firearm and shooting the drone down. But in October 2015, a Kentucky, I think, municipal judge dismissed the case against Meredith for being arrested for this crime. And so they dismissed the charges, saying he had the right to do it. So Boggs sued Meredith in federal court for damages for his drone. And just recently, March 2017, the federal judge dismissed that case, the Boggs damage suit case, deferring it back to the state, saying that there wasn't a federal jurisdiction. Which was really unfortunate because a lot of the community was trying to get some type of judgment to classify drones. If you remember, we talked about the Perker case, where the National Transportation Safety Board decided that drones were considered aircraft. So if drones are aircraft in this case, then that would have put a precedence that you can't shoot an aircraft out of the sky. But the judge refused to kind of hear that matter. They pushed it back down the state, refused the jurisdiction. And it's probably not the best way to state that. If there's any lawyers out there, you can probably put some comments about the actual real legal terms of that. But the bummer for us as pilots was that the FAA, even though they claim that drones are aircraft, they failed to bring any action against this Meredith, this drone slayer guy. They failed to support the fact that somebody shot an aircraft out of the sky or do anything about it. So the laws around the use of airspace, they're still really unclear. as far as how drones are indeed part of the national airspace. And in this case, the Boggs case, is really more a discussion about trespass and or privacy issues. And this is a major unresolved point of law that really gets lost in most of the public arguments about drones. We talk about drones flying and the safety of flying over people or the safety of it, but a lot of times the stronger arguments and where the most pushback is coming from the public and from law, the legislation branches and the cities, are a lot of times more about trespass issues and privacy issues. And that's where I think drone pilots face the most scrutiny. And I think the injury part of it, or the drone flying into an aircraft, even though that's hugely important, is kind of secondary towards the fear people have of those other things, the trespass and the privacy issues. So kind of moving forward, in May, which is just last month, there's a lot of things that have happened and have not provided any clarity to this discussion. So May 19th, there was Taylor versus the FAA. And that's where the FAA, if you remember back to the Part 101, Part 107, they started registering, mandating that everybody register their drone. Taylor sued the FAA saying they did not have the jurisdiction to do that. And the federal court in District DC, District of Columbia, they actually ruled that the FAA cannot require registration of drones for recreational users, kind of citing that a recreational user is no different than a model aircraft. So you'll remember in the 2012 Modernization and Reform Act, the FAA were strictly prohibited to insert themselves over anything to do with model aircraft. So this May 19th District Court ruling against the FAA really went back to that and supported the fact that the FAA cannot regulate anything to do with model aircraft. And they said that the FAA overstepped their authority here. And this ruling is kind of a big deal because on the one hand, it's the law working to the checks and balances to say an agency can't overstep their bounds, which in that way it's a good thing. The unfortunate part is it was one way that having everybody register their drone, it was at least one way to start getting some sort of accountability to the pilots out there. If something were to go down and some drone crashed into somebody, you've got the markings, you know who it's registered to, and you can track it back to the pilot. So in that way, it was potentially a good thing, and it was the FAA trying to do the right thing. So I want to get back to that here in a minute, but I want to go on to a couple more things that happened this month of May, and then maybe we'll conclude with kind of the FAA and the struggle that they're having. So that was May 19th. Also May 19th, which actually circulated, which is kind of coincidental, the same time this ruling came out from the Federal District Court in D.C., that same day, but was the published date, but it was actually circulated the next day on the 20th. President Trump's staff circulated a draft of an executive order. I think it might be like an executive order, circulated it through Congress, executive order that he wants to produce regarding drone threats. And that was first reported, I think, in the New York Times. I happened to see it on a Recode tweet. And you can see OPG, my website, Opon Geezer's website. I'll put a PDF up there of the actual draft of this. I'm going to call it an executive order. I'm not sure what the real draft, I'm not sure what the real thing is. But basically, White House staff is trying to come up with a executive order to start figuring out how to control drone activity and to basically eliminate the threat of a drone in some sort of a national airspace problem, which could be some ways of taking it over, somehow jamming it, somehow making it crash, somehow shooting it out of the air. They go through all these things. But here we have the president trying to say, okay, drones are potentially a problem and we need to have a way of being able to eliminate that threat. So instead of embracing drones as a potential commercial opportunity, here's the federal government saying, we got to be careful, and rightly so. And I'm sure there's really huge reasons why they need to look at that. But it's still, if you think of it at the balance of scales, there's still a lot more public opinion and government agencies piling on that side of negative, the negative side of this whole drone argument. And there's not much going on in the private sector. So that's the 19th of May. So May 21st, DJI, and if you don't know, they're a major drone manufacturer. They announced, and I'll throw a copy of the email I received, but they announced that every drone they make must be registered through their app in order to unlock anything but minimal functionality of their app. So when you start your drone up, you start your, like my Mavic, you go in, you launch the app, and that's where your camera is, and that's how you control. And they're saying if you don't register, you can't even fly this thing more than a few feet away or 100 feet, whatever. You can't fly it, you can't use the camera, blah, blah, blah. So basically, they're forcing you to register your drone through the app in order to use it. So the manufacturers, and it came out right after the district court's ruling about the FAA cannot register drones. 2 days later, DJI says, well, you have to register with us. So at least the manufacturers, these major guys, are stepping up and trying to get ahead of this curve and trying to say, well, you may not be able to register the drone with the government, but we're going to keep track of who you are. And that could be a whole nother problem with privacy and whatever. But at least the manufacturers are trying to compensate. And if you remember back to that Seattle case with the Space Needle, it was a manufacturer who turned over the drone operator to the police, to the law enforcement, whatever agency that was. So on the one hand, you've got the government trying to register, the judicial branch saying you can't, and then the manufacturer saying, okay, well, we're going to register. And it may not have actually played out that way, like cause and effect, but that's how it came out on the timeline. So it's kind of interesting. So that's kind of all of that's not even half, that's not even a quarter of all of the legal stuff that's going on of trying to figure out what a drone actually is in the airspace and what are the privacy laws and what are, where can you fly, where you can't fly, what can law enforcement do, what can local authorities do, what can the FAA do. It's just a mess right now. But let's kind of come back now to where Casey is investigated by the FAA, because that's what got me thinking about this whole thing. It got me, I don't want to use the word scared, but got me really nervous about every time I fly, am I a criminal? So really, as the FAA investigates Casey, so here's Casey Neistat, and he's doing things with his drone that may or may not align, I'm not going to make judgments, may or may not align with safe flights and rules and laws and blah, blah, blah. But here's the FAA that are investigating him. But the reality of it, if you look across the board, the FAA seems really only to be concerned with airspace and public safety of the national airspace. That seems to be their main point. They only secondarily seem to be concerned with using, I don't want to say concerned, but to be going after somebody to prosecute or to bring charges against. They only seem to be secondarily worried about people who are using their drone commercially. And that's especially as it relates to YouTube. There's a lot of people that are posting drone footage on YouTube and monetizing it, and I have not heard too many people, and of course who knows, but you don't hear too many people on YouTube getting busted by the FAA for posting their drone video and making money off it. Even though technically that's probably against the law, FAA doesn't seem to be concerned. They're more concerned if they don't want you to bringing down a commercial airliner because you're flying your dumb butts flying your drone right next to the LAX. And that's great. Totally support that. So assuming that the FAA is investigating Casey from that aspect, and it's more of a dangerous type thing rather than a public safety type thing rather than a making money with your drone type of thing. Because keep in mind, Casey doesn't, he just augments his videos with drone footage. And there's a 10-minute video may only have 20 seconds, if that, of drone footage, and then occasionally there'll be an entire episode devoted to like a review of a product, where that whole episode will be reviewed. But a lot of times, if you think back to when the Mavic first came out and when the the GoPro Karma came out, for the Karma for sure, he had a representative from GoPro there with him flying, and they were at some river somewhere, and I don't know what the location was. I don't know if that was, but there was a representative from the manufacturer there. So he flew it out over the river and hopefully flew it back, and hopefully it was all safe and legal. But if the FAA is investigating Casey from just the safety thing, then I wonder if there's any like severity levels to any of the laws. And what I mean by that, thinking about Casey and what the FAA would be bringing against him, what is the severity? For example, is flying like at 50 feet just inside the outer fringe of like a Class D airspace, Is that, and you lift it off in a parking lot and you take a picture and bring it back down and you're 10 feet above the ground or 50 feet above the ground, but you just happen to be just on that edge of outside of your local airport? Is that the same seriousness as, in the eyes of the FAA, as if you're flying at 400 feet or higher and you're right outside the runway fence of SFO and you're paralleling the runway with your drone filming aircraft landing or some commercial planes landing? Is there a difference there? Or is it all one thing? You broke the laws of black and white, and if you just lifted your using your Wi-Fi on your phone, if you just lifted your Mavic off the ground to take a selfie, just 3 miles out from the airport in a parking lot, is that just as bad as being like right at the edge of the runway? And I don't know. Is it the same penalties, or how do they figure that? And I'm thinking back to some of the examples we've seen on YouTube with Casey. But kind of getting to that, Perker, he's probably the most related case. If this is an FAA action and the local authorities, in Casey's case, New York City, if they don't get involved with any of the prosecution or any of the investigation, if it's just the FAA, then Perker's probably the best example. And that could make sense because, as far as I know, there's been really against Casey, there's been no injuries from him flying. There's been no damages to property. There's been no local air traffic control complaints about what he's been doing, as far as I know, which would be similar to the Perker case. And also the process and the results of the Perker case really align with what Casey had made his statements on the video, where he wasn't allowed to fly in New York City. If he did, he'd get in more trouble, so he had to leave the city. So it sounds like there's been some kind of settlement already discussed. The way, just from if you think it through, I could be completely wrong, but if that's the case, then it sounds like the outcome might have been the FAA came down, levied a big initial fine, whatever big means, and then there was a settlement that already has happened, and it was reduced down to some smaller fine, and there's some conditions similar to Skypan. If you remember Skypan, who weren't allowed to operate anymore in New York City, else they would face another $150,000 fine. I'm assuming, I'm analyzing and trying to just look forward, that there's some similar situation with Casey, the way he made that statement. If he flies in New York City again, they're going to get him. So that's why, if you align it with that. So that's probably, if let's pretend that's the case. Let's pretend that's happened. The FAA came down and said, we are going to wallop you with $1 million fine or $10,000 fine or whatever. And you go to a settlement agreement and they say, we'll fine you $1,000 and you have to do, you have to make public service, or you can't fly in New York City anymore, you can't fly in your local area, whatever, you can't violate any more laws, else we're going to get you again. If that's the case, then that really could apply at that point. That could apply to anybody who posts a video on YouTube or have already published videos on YouTube, because now you've got this whole body of evidence that's out there, and people can watch that and they can report you, and it's already if you violated any aspect of any FAA law or any local law, that could be you facing that same thing, or me. It could be us, and that's what got me scared when I first heard that comment. Casey made that comment so quick, and it was just like 3 sentences and he was out the door skateboarding down the street with his Spark in his backpack. And it was just so nonchalant about it. But it was like, to me, that's what that whole first video, that whole vlog number 1, was me just trying to think this whole thing through. What does that mean? Hopefully that part of, if there has been a settlement, or hopefully in the future, I hope that Casey has to stop flying his drone and he has to stop making videos the way he does, because I really enjoy him. But let's hope that he learned something from the experience, and he always flies safe and always flies within the law. That's what we all hope for. And it would be good maybe if there's some sort of mandatory education on his part. Maybe he has to get his Part 107 within a certain amount of time, like 90 days from now you must have your 107, else something else happens to him. That would be good too, because then you've got a commercial pilot, and he's setting the example for the rest of us, because he's so big. He's got 7 million subscribers or 10 million, whatever it is, and people watch his videos. That would be awesome. And that setting example, I think, is important, because if he were to do some public outreach in future videos, some serious drone safety videos, with Casey's following and his reach and his influence, that could be a huge opportunity for anybody who flies a drone, whether recreationally or commercially. He could be like a spokesman for, like, here's the right thing to do. Now, it's hard because people have already got an opinion of him, but I mean, it happens all the time with influential people where they make a mistake and they have to come back from it. And I'm not trying to judge. I'm not trying to say anything happened or he makes mistakes or whatever. But we're playing through this whole scenario of the FAA, busting him out. But I'm pretty sure he has to agree to demonstrate safe and legal future flights. So I think you'll see in his YouTube videos, you probably won't see any flying over traffic, or you probably won't see any, whatever. And I'm sure there's something, don't repeat your mistakes, don't be stupid. There's some sort of nasty clause in any settlement agreement if he does. And here again, I'm just guessing, I'm just supposing, I'm just trying to predict the future with no knowledge. It's just a guess. And, really what we might look at is what happens to the current videos that he has. He may or he may not be able to keep any of those current videos that have any drone footage at all. Either he may not be able to keep them monetized, or he may not even be able to keep them published. He may have to take them down. So it'll be interesting to look at his channel and see what happens with those videos, to see what happens. But in the end, I think hopefully nothing bad happens to him, because I really want to keep seeing what he does and keep learning from not from his example of flying a drone, but keep learning from the way he tells a story and the way he does his thing, and his just positive attitude and how he helps like the UPS guy out. He's a good guy, and I just want to see that. So hopefully he just has a fine, which could be, if the FAA were to fine me, it'd probably be devastating on my income level. Maybe it's just a token fine at Casey's, assuming he's doing well. But either way, he's our friend. He's my friend. Well, he's not my friend, but I like him, and I hope the best for him. So hopefully that's all. He gets fined, and he has to do some stuff, and he has to do some right things. So where does that leave us? If that's what happens, let's assume that's kind of the way it goes, and nothing drastic. No jail time or anything like that. What is that landscape for the rest of us? What is the landscape for any drone pilot out there, whether you're a recreational pilot or you're a commercial pilot? Is the FAA, are they coming after all of us? Will local law enforcement come breaking down our doors and arrest us and seize our drone and take all of our footage? The FAA, they're concerned with the safety of the national airspace, and they do, the accident reporting part of it. If you cause damage over a certain amount, you have to report it. Rubric Law, and I'll have a link to his stuff. He's one of the attorneys that's involved at the Taylor, the District of Columbia case. Taylor's got some more cases against the FAA out there, and there's not just one, there's like 4, and I think Rubric is involved with that as a lawyer. But anyway, he's got on his website, he reports that the FAA, from law enforcement perspective, they've only prosecuted 48 operators to date. So only 48 people have they actually gone after for some reason. And I don't know what those are. But this guy Taylor, who was involved in the DC case, he did a request through the Freedom of Information Act to the FAA to ask for how many records were provided to law enforcement agencies when they were asking the FAA for owners of drones or registrations. And the FAA could not provide a single instance where they've given law enforcement a name of a drone operator. So I'll let that sink in for just a second. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Law enforcement's not asking for that information, or the FAA is not providing it, or it's just not that big of a deal yet. But it does not seem that the FAA has the staff or really the desire to police every single drone incident. Nor it doesn't really seem like they want to make an example out of individuals. We'll have to see what happens with Casey Neistat. But whether even a manned pilot, an actual manned aircraft pilot or an unmanned pilot, the FAA is not looking to go out there and just like publicly persecute this person. I don't know if that's not the right way to say it, but they just don't really want to make an example of somebody. Because think of like Harrison Ford, recently, I don't know, maybe 4 months ago now, where he landed on the kind of the wrong one. He landed on the wrong runway. Wow, that's hard. Wrong runway of Orange County Airport. And he actually landed on like a taxi skirt instead of the actual the runway or something. Flew right over a commercial airliner. And they don't appear to be like going after him and publicly, taking away his license and making a big deal out of it. They're just investigating him, obviously. And I think the same for us being drone operators. They're not going to come after us and put our, make it a headline news. I'm hoping, because the FAA, they have far more important issues to attend to. And we'll talk more about that in some future episodes of Traffic Talk. So Where we're at, though, is this controlled airspace and the rules of the air. We just don't know where the drones fit into this. Is a drone an aircraft or is it not? Local jurisdictions are throughout the country that are applying all kinds of different ordinances and methods of enforcement and prosecution. They already have a lot of things on the books. They already have trespass things on the books and privacy, stalking, and that kind of stuff on the books, reckless endangerment and mischief, and all those things they can use to prosecute somebody who blatantly violates the law, is if they can find the drone operator who's flying it. And it's been proven successful in Seattle and New York City that they are able to manage those unthoughtful people who are doing dumb things with their drones. So really what you're talking about is anything with damages, recklessness, privacy, and trespass. Those are the big things. And right now, that's all the big part of the drone pilot's problems. It's that public perception and some of the people who own these drones just being reckless and being stupid and publishing that stuff on their videos. And so where does that leave us? I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows. There's been no definite laws. There's no rulings of any of this that we can point to and say, this federal court said this, and we can hang something on that, or this state said this. It's still the wild, wild west. So in this episode, I just went back and I found just a few examples of what causes all of this turmoil and what we as drone operators are facing, just simply to hear that noise of takeoff and be able to fly. It's sad and it's maddening. So the next episode, maybe number 3, maybe number 4, I want to focus on what the FAA is not doing, what the member organizations that get together to support drone operators, what they're not doing, and really what the manufacturers are not doing, and then really what they are doing, and really how these higher courts that are how they're responding or how they're not responding to the cases brought before them. And really the bigger piece of this, and the part where we have to pay more attention, we being drone operators, is just how state and municipal governments are extending their power over the airspace, because that's where things are going. All of these problems, all of these issues, drone pilots, we have to figure out how to navigate, and we're on our own. You don't know. You have an idea if it's okay to fly, but you really don't know, and it's really hard to figure out. So what that means is it's good luck to all of us. If some enforcement agency comes along, they could arrest you, fine you, confiscate your drone, throw you in jail, issue you a ticket, or they could tell you can't fly there when you can. Hopefully they're cool and they'd say you can't fly there if you can't, and they'll let you land and get. But it's crazy. So that's where we're at. And I think I have exhausted myself. Hopefully you guys are still hanging with me. All of this stuff that I talked about, I'll post on the website, so you can kind of look at it and read it for yourself and try to make some conclusions. Smash the like button if you want to see more of these as I go through local laws, especially California. I've got a good analysis of all the laws that California's been trying to pass over the last couple of years regarding drones. And I'm going to talk about that at some point in the future. So like button if you want to see more of that. Subscribe if you want to follow along with this, trying to navigate this mess. And I will see you next time. Drive safe. OPG's out. Let's get right to it. So this is my number 2 log, and whoa, dude, did you see that? There we go. If you're not watching on YouTube, this guy just about ran into a couple of people. This is why I do traffic time, because the driver's like that. Okay, anyway, man, he's crazy. I'm gonna have to cut this and start over, because this is like not even getting started right.